My name is Libby Harper, and 4 years ago, my life shattered in a sterile doctor's office in Seattle, Washington. I was 45, married to my husband Ethan for 22 years, and we had a son, Caleb, who had just turned 19. I thought we were a happy family. Ethan was the kind of man who'd bring me coffee in bed on weekends, and Caleb was my pride, a bright kid with a future ahead of him. But that day, everything I believed about my family, my life, and myself crumbled. Started with a lump I found during a routine self-exam. I didn't think much of it at first, just a little bump, probably nothing. But a nagging feeling in my gut told me to get it checked. So I did. I'll never forget the way Dr. Ellis's face changed when she felt the lump. Her hands paused, her brow furrowed, and she ordered a mammogram on the spot. A week later, I was back in her office, sitting on the edge of a chair that felt too hard, too cold. "Libby," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "it's stage 2 breast cancer." The words hit me like a freight train. Breast cancer. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was nod as she explained the next steps: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. It was going to be a long, brutal fight, but I was ready. I had to be. I had a family to live for, a life to hold on to. At least that's what I thought. That evening, I sat Ethan and Caleb down in our living room. The space felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. I remember the way the lamp cast a soft glow over the couch, the way Caleb's sneakers were still untied from his rush home from college. I told them everything, my voice trembling as I forced the words out. "I have breast cancer," I said, "but the doctor says we caught it early. I'm going to fight this." The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb stared at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap. Ethan reached over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We'll get through this together, Lib," he said. But his voice sounded hollow, like he was reading from a script. I wanted to believe him so badly. I needed to believe him. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments, biopsies, scans, consultations. My oncologist laid out the plan: a lumpectomy to remove the tumor, followed by months of chemo and radiation. It was going to be hell, but I was prepared. First, Ethan was there, driving me to every appointment, sitting in the waiting room with a coffee in hand. Caleb, though, was distant. He'd keep his earbuds in, barely speaking, his eyes glued to his phone. I told myself it was just shock, maybe fear. They needed time to process this, just like I did. I clung to that hope, even as I felt the first cracks forming in our family. But time didn't heal those cracks. It widened them, exposing a truth I wasn't ready to face. 2 months into my treatment, everything changed, and the family I thought I had slipped away like a shadow in the night. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the diagnosis pressing down on me. I thought about the life we'd built, our cozy home in Seattle, the vacations we'd taken to the Oregon coast, the way Caleb used to run to me with his school projects, beaming with pride. Those memories felt so far away now, like they belonged to someone else. I couldn't shake the image of Ethan's forced smile, the way Caleb wouldn't meet my eyes. My chest ached, not just from the cancer, but from the fear that I was losing more than my health. I whispered into the darkness, "We'll get through this," echoing Ethan's words, trying to convince myself. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what was coming next. The first few weeks of treatment were a haze of pain and exhaustion. The lumpectomy left me sore, my chest bandaged and tender, but the real battle started with chemotherapy. I'd sit in the infusion center, a cold ford dripping poison into my veins, trying to focus on the future instead of the nausea creeping up my throat. Ethan was there at first, sitting across from me, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up to ask if I needed water. But as the weeks went on, I noticed a shift. He'd sit farther away, his responses shorter, his eyes avoiding mine. Caleb was even worse. He barely spoke to me, locking himself in his room when he wasn't at college. I told myself they were struggling, that they'd come around. But I was wrong. One night, after a particularly rough chemo session, I overheard Ethan on the phone in the kitchen. I dragged myself downstairs for a glass of water, my body aching, my head pounding. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but I caught every word. "It's too much, Sarah," he said. "She's not the same anymore. I didn't sign up for this." My heart stopped. Sarah? Who was Sarah? And what did he mean he didn't sign up for this? I stood frozen in the hallway, the glass trembling in my hand as he continued. "I just want to feel alive again, you know? I can't keep doing this." The words cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. I felt like I'd been punched, the air sucked out of my lungs. He was talking about me, his wife, the mother of his child, the woman fighting for her life. The next morning, I confronted him. I waited until Caleb left for class, my hands shaking as I sat at the kitchen table, still in my pajamas, my head wrapped in a scarf to hide my thinning hair. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "who's Sarah?" His face went pale, his coffee mug pausing halfway to his mouth. He didn't deny it, didn't even try to lie. "Libby," he said, setting the mug down, "I can't do this anymore." My stomach dropped. "Do what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely at me. "Watching you waste away. It's not a life. I've given you 22 years. I deserve to be happy." The words hit me like a slap, each one a betrayal deeper than the last. I stared at him, my vision blurring with tears. "I'm fighting for my life, Ethan," I said, my voice cracking. "And you're leaving me because it's too hard for you?" He didn't answer, just stood up, his jaw tight. 2 days later, he packed a bag. I watched from the bedroom window as he loaded it into his car, his movements quick and deliberate, like he couldn't wait to get away. Caleb came downstairs, his own suitcase in hand, his face blank. "Caleb," I called, my voice desperate, "please don't go." But he didn't even look at me. He just followed his father out the door, the sound of it slamming shut echoing through the house. I sank to the floor, still in my hospital gown, the chemo still burning through my veins, and realized I was completely alone. No husband, no son, no support, just me and the cancer that was trying to kill me. That night, I cried until I had nothing left, the silence of the house suffocating me. I thought about the life I'd built with Ethan, the way he'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, the way Caleb had once called me his hero. Those promises felt like lies now, empty words that meant nothing when things got hard. But even in that darkness, a spark of defiance flickered inside me. I wasn't going to let this break me. I'd fight for my life, not for them, but for myself. I didn't know how I'd do it, but I knew I had to. Because if I survived this, I'd make sure they'd never forget the woman they left behind. The days after Ethan and Caleb left were a blur of pain and loneliness. I'd wake up reaching for Ethan, only to find his side of the bed cold and empty. The house felt like a tomb, every creak and whisper a reminder of the family that had abandoned me. I was in the middle of chemotherapy, my body weak, my hair falling out in clumps, my reflection a stranger in the mirror. I'd look at myself, pale, bald, my eyes sunken, and wonder how I'd keep going. But I had no choice. The cancer wasn't going to wait for me to grieve, and neither was the treatment. So I fought, alone, with nothing but my own stubborn will to keep me alive. Mornings were the hardest. I dragged myself out of bed, my joints aching, my stomach churning from the chemo, and forced myself to eat a piece of toast, even though it tasted like ash. I'd drive myself to the cancer center, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands, praying I wouldn't pass out on the way. The nurses were kind, their smiles gentle as they hooked me up to the floor, but I could see the pity in their eyes. "Where is your family today, Libby?" one of them asked once. I forced a smile, my throat tight. "They're busy," I lied. I didn't want their pity, I wanted my family, but they were gone, and I had to face this on my own. But something unexpected happened in those dark days. People I barely knew started to step in, filling the void Ethan and Caleb had left. My neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, a sweet woman in her 70s, began bringing me homemade casseroles every few days. "You need to eat, dear," she'd say, her voice firm but kind as she set a dish on my counter. My old high school friend, Nora, who I hadn't seen in years, showed up one day with a bag of groceries and a stack of books. "I heard what you're going through," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm here for you." Even a local support group from the community center offered to drive me to appointments when I was too weak to manage on my own. These people, strangers really, showed me more love than the ones who were supposed to be my everything. One afternoon, as I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, too tired to move, I got a call from the cancer center. They'd assigned me a volunteer caregiver, a retired nurse named Margaret. She was in her 60s, with a no-nonsense attitude and a warm smile that reminded me of my late grandmother. "I'm not here to coddle you, Libby," she said during our first meeting, her hands on her hips. "I'm here to help you fight." And that's exactly what she did. Margaret made sure I took my meds, pushed me to eat even when I didn't want to, and sat with me during the worst of the chemo sessions, her presence a quiet strength I didn't know I needed. Slowly, with her help and the support of these unexpected allies, I started to feel a flicker of hope, even as the emotional wounds of Ethan and Caleb's betrayal throbbed like an open sore. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the family I'd lost. I'd scroll through old photos on my phone, Ethan and me at our wedding, Caleb as a toddler running through the park, the three of us on a camping trip years ago. We looked so happy, but now I wondered if it had all been a lie. Had I been too busy holding everything together to see the cracks? Had I ignored the signs that Ethan was unhappy, that Caleb was drifting? Questions haunted me, but I pushed them aside. I couldn't change the past, but I could fight for my future. And I would, because I was still here, still breathing, and I wasn't going to let their betrayal be the end of my story. As the months dragged on, I settled into a grueling routine of treatment and survival. Chemotherapy left me weak, my body a battlefield of nausea and fatigue, but I kept going, fueled by the support of Margaret, Nora, and Mrs. Brooks. My hair was gone, my skin pale and splotchy, but I started to see small signs of progress. My scans were improving, the tumor shrinking. I was fighting, and I was winning, even if it felt like I was doing it with one hand tied behind my back. But even as my body began to heal, the emotional wounds from Ethan and Caleb's abandonment festered, raw and unhealed. And then one day, a letter arrived that tore them wide open again. Came on a rainy afternoon, the kind of gray Seattle day that makes you want to stay inside forever. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea, when I saw the envelope in the stack of mail Mrs. Brooks had brought over. The handwriting was Caleb's. I'd recognize it anywhere, the same messy scrawl he'd used on birthday cards and school notes. My heart leapt, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. Maybe he was sorry. Maybe he wanted to come back to make things right. I tore the envelope open, my hands trembling, but what I read crushed me all over again. It wasn't an apology, not even a "How are you, Mom?" It was a single paragraph, cold and transactional. "Hey Mom, I need a cosigner for a loan to buy a car. Can you help me out? Thanks." That was it. No mention of my cancer, no regret for leaving, just a demand for something he wanted. I stared at the letter, my vision blurring with tears. I'd spent months hoping for a sign that Caleb cared, that he'd come back to me, but this was all I got. A request for money, as if I were nothing more than a bank. Pain was sharper than anything the cancer had thrown at me, a betrayal that cut straight to my core. I thought about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering if he was okay, if he missed me at all. I thought about the way he'd walked out without a goodbye, following his father like I didn't matter. And now this. I tore the letter in half, then into quarters, my hands shaking with rage and grief. I grabbed a lighter from the drawer, lit the pieces on fire in the sink, and watched them burn, the smoke curling up like a release of all the hope I'd been holding on to. That moment was a turning point for me. I realized I'd been waiting for something that was never going to come. Ethan and Caleb weren't going to show up with apologies, begging for forgiveness. They didn't care about me, they cared about what I could give them, and when I couldn't, they'd walked away. I wiped my tears, my jaw tight, and made a promise to myself. I was done waiting, done hoping, done letting their betrayal define me. I was going to survive this, not for them, but for me. I'd rebuild my life, and when I did, they'd see what they'd lost. Not a weak, disposable woman, but a fighter who'd come back stronger than ever. I spent the rest of that day cleaning out the house, purging every reminder of them. I packed up Ethan's old clothes, Caleb's childhood toys, the family photos on the walls, and shoved them into boxes for donation. I turned Caleb's old room into a small office, setting up a desk and a laptop. I started freelancing again, taking on small bookkeeping jobs to keep my mind busy. It wasn't much, but it made me feel useful, like I was more than just a cancer patient. Margaret sat with me that evening, her eyes soft but proud. "You're stronger than you know, Libby," she said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, a fire burning in my chest. I was going to prove her right, and I was going to prove Ethan and Caleb wrong. By the 1-year mark, I was in remission. Cancer was gone, my scans clear, my hair growing back in soft, silver curls. I stood in front of the mirror one morning, running my fingers through the new growth, and smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. I'd done it, I'd beaten breast cancer, and I'd done it alone. Well, not entirely alone. Margaret, Nora, Mrs. Brooks, and the community that had rallied around me had been my lifeline. Their kindness a reminder that I was worth fighting for, even if my own family didn't think so. I celebrated that milestone quietly, just me, Margaret, and Nora, sharing a bottle of sparkling cider in my living room, laughing and crying as we toasted to new beginnings. But even as my body healed, the emotional scars lingered. I catch myself thinking about Ethan and Caleb, wondering where they were, what they were doing, if they ever thought about me. I'd stopped waiting for them to come back, but the pain of their betrayal still ached, a dull throb that flared up on quiet nights. I started journaling at Margaret's suggestion, pouring my thoughts onto the page every evening. At first, the entries were raw, filled with anger and grief. How could they leave me? How could my own son walk away? But over time, they turned into something else. "I survived," I wrote one night. "I fought and I won. That makes me stronger than they'll ever know." Writing became my therapy, a way to process the hurt and reclaim my story. I threw myself into work, growing my freelance bookkeeping business bit by bit. I took on more clients, mostly small businesses in Seattle, and found a sense of purpose in helping them manage their finances. It wasn't just about the money, it was about feeling useful again, about rebuilding the confidence Ethan and Caleb had shattered. I started going to a local cancer support group too, sharing my story with other survivors who understood the loneliness, the fear, the triumph of making it through. They became my new family, their hugs and encouragement a balm to my wounded heart. I was healing slowly but surely, and with every step I felt a little more like myself. Or maybe a new version of myself, one who was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand alone. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was working at my desk when my phone rang. It was a lawyer, Mr. Daniel Foster, calling about my great-aunt Clara, a reclusive woman I hadn't seen in years. She'd passed away, he said, and left her entire estate to me. I listened in stunned silence as he listed the assets, property, stocks, and offshore account. After taxes and fees, it came to $9 million. $9 million. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. That kind of money was life-changing, but it also filled me with a quiet dread. I knew, deep in my bones, that it would bring Ethan and Caleb back. They'd hear about the inheritance somehow, and they'd come sniffing around, pretending to care, hungry for a piece of the fortune I'd inherited. But I wasn't the same woman they'd left behind. I was ready for them, and this time I'd be the one in control. I sat there for a long time after the call, staring out the window at the rain, my mind racing. I thought about the house I'd lived in for 22 years, the one I'd shared with Ethan and Caleb, the one that had felt so empty after they left. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield, a place where I'd fought and won, but also a place I needed to leave behind. I started making plans not just to protect my new fortune, but to protect myself. I wasn't going to let Ethan and Caleb take anything else from me. They'd walked away once, but if they came back, they'd find a woman who'd learned how to stand tall, a woman who held all the cards. For years after Ethan and Caleb walked out, I was a different woman. I'd moved on not just from the cancer, but from the pain of their betrayal. My bookkeeping business was thriving, my new community of friends and survivors a constant source of joy, and I'd bought a small cottage in the mountains outside Seattle, a quiet retreat where I could start fresh. The $9 million from Aunt Clara's estate had given me financial security, but I hadn't let it change who I was. I donated to cancer charities, set up scholarships for young women in need, and kept most of the money in a trust, protected and untouchable. I was at peace until the knock came. It was a crisp fall morning, and I was at my old house in Seattle, packing up the last of my things before the new owners took over. I donated the house to a nonprofit that supported cancer survivors, turning it into transitional housing for women who needed a safe place to heal. I was in the kitchen, taping up a box, when I heard the knock, loud, insistent, like someone who expected to be let in. My heart sank as I peered through the window. There they were, Ethan and Caleb, standing on my porch like they'd never left. Ethan looked older, his hair grayer, his clothes wrinkled. Caleb, now 23, stood behind him, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I'd known this day would come, but seeing them there still felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, watching them through the glass, my mind racing. Ethan knocked again, his voice muffled but clear. "Libby, we know you're in there. We just want to talk." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed what I'd say, but now that it was here, the anger and hurt came rushing back. I opened the door a crack, stepping outside and closing it behind me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. Ethan's face lit up, a fake smile spreading across his lips. "Libby, thank God. You look great." Caleb nodded, offering a small, awkward smile. "Yeah, Mom. You look healthy." Crossed my arms, my gaze hard. "I'm surprised you're here," I said. "I figured you were still too busy living your best lives without me." Ethan's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Can we come in?" he asked. "No," I said, my voice firm. "You can talk from here." There was a long, awkward silence. Ethan glanced at Caleb, then cleared his throat. "We heard about Clara," he said. "About the inheritance." Of course they had. I'd known that was why they were here, but hearing it out loud still stung. "And?" I asked, my tone sharp. "We thought maybe we could reconnect," Ethan said, his voice careful. "Start fresh." I let out a bitter laugh. "Reconnect? After 4 years of nothing?" Caleb finally spoke, his voice soft. "We didn't know how to come back, Mom. It was hard. Hard. That word again. It was always hard for them, never for me, the woman who'd fought cancer alone, who'd cried herself to sleep, who'd rebuilt her life from nothing. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw them for what they were, 2 people who only cared about me when I had something to offer. Ethan's eyes were calculating, already counting the millions he thought he could claim. Caleb's were softer, maybe even guilty, but I couldn't trust that, not after everything. "You left because I wasn't useful to you anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Because I was sick, weak, a burden. You wanted the version of me who took care of you, who made your lives easy. But that version is gone. Ethan looked offended. "That's not fair, Libby," he said. "No," I snapped, cutting him off. What wasn't fair was being left to die alone while the people I loved walked away. They had no response to that, and in the silence, I knew I'd never let them back into my life, not without consequences. The silence on the porch stretched, heavy with the weight of 4 years of pain. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his fake smile gone, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Caleb looked down at his shoes, his shoulders hunched like he wanted to disappear. I stood firm, my arms crossed, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. I'd spent years imagining this moment, wondering what I'd say, how I'd feel. Now that it was here, I felt a strange mix of anger and clarity. I wasn't the broken woman they'd left behind. I was stronger, sharper, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the past with their half-hearted excuses. Finn finally spoke, his voice tinged with frustration. "Look, Libby, I know we made mistakes. I wasn't strong enough back then. I couldn't handle it, watching you go through that. But I'm here now. We're here now." He gestured to Caleb as if that made everything okay. I stared at him, my jaw tight. "You're here now because I inherited $9 million, I said, my voice cold. "Don't pretend this is about anything else." Finn's face flushed, but he didn't deny it. Caleb looked up, his eyes shimmering with what might have been tears. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I followed Dad. I thought I'd come back sooner, but I didn't know how." His voice cracked, and for a moment I felt a pang of softness. He was my son, after all, the boy I'd raised, the boy I'd loved with every piece of me. But I couldn't let that softness take over, not yet. "Scared," I echoed, my voice steady. "You were scared, so you left me to fight cancer alone. Do you have any idea what that was like, Caleb?" I drove myself to chemo, vomiting in the parking lot because I couldn't make it inside. I changed my own bandages after surgery, crying because I couldn't reach the ones on my back. I went to sleep every night wondering if I'd wake up, and the whole time I was wondering where my son was, why he didn't care. Caleb's face crumpled, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I thought you had help. I thought you didn't want to see me." I shook my head, my throat tight. "I wanted my family," I said. "I wanted the people I loved to show me I mattered. But you didn't. Neither of you did." Finn stepped forward, his voice sharper now. "Libby, you're acting like we abandoned you to die. But you didn't die. You're fine now. You're thriving. So why are you still holding on to this anger?" Something inside me snapped. "I'm thriving because I fought for my life alone," I said, my voice rising. I cooked for myself while I was too sick to stand. I dragged myself to radiation when I could barely walk. I survived because of strangers, neighbors, friends, a volunteer nurse, who cared more about me than my own family. You don't get to come back now and act like it's all in the past. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "I need time to think," I said, stepping back toward the door. "And whatever you're expecting to find here, it won't be what you think." I closed the door, my hands trembling as I locked it, the sound of the bolt sliding into place a small victory. I leaned against the wood, my breath coming in short gasps, the weight of the confrontation settling over me. I'd stood up to them, faced the past head-on, and I hadn't crumbled. It felt like a triumph, but I knew this wasn't the end. Ethan wouldn't give up that easily, not with $9 million on the line. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down, my mind racing. I needed to be ready for whatever came next because I wasn't just protecting my money, I was protecting the life I'd rebuilt, the woman I'd become. And I'd be damned if I let them take that from me again. The days after Ethan and Caleb's visit were a whirlwind of emotions. I'd stood my ground, but the confrontation had left me shaken, the old wounds reopened and raw. I kept replaying Caleb's tears, the way his voice had cracked when he said he was sorry. A part of me wanted to believe him, to let him back into my life, but I couldn't, not yet. Ethan's words, though, had only fueled my anger. His entitlement, his refusal to truly acknowledge the pain he'd caused, made it clear he hadn't changed. He was here for the money, and I knew he'd try again. I wasn't going to let him catch me off guard. It was time to prepare. I called my lawyer, Mr. Daniel Foster, the next morning. "Libby," he said, his voice warm but professional, "I had a feeling I'd hear from you soon." I explained everything. Ethan and Caleb's sudden return, their thinly veiled interest in the inheritance, my fears about what they might do next. "I need to make sure they can't touch anything," I said, my voice firm. "Let's update everything, my will, my trust, everything." Daniel agreed, and over the next few days we worked to make my estate airtight. I transferred the remaining assets into a living trust, naming beneficiaries who had stood by me: Nora, Margaret, Mrs. Brooks, and the Cancer Foundation I'd been supporting. Ethan and Caleb weren't getting a cent, and I made sure there were no loopholes for them to exploit. But I didn't stop there. I had another idea, something more personal, something to ensure my story would never be twisted. I turned my old office into a recording studio, setting up a camera, a microphone, and a secure lockbox. I started filming video journals, speaking directly to the camera, documenting everything: my cancer battle, Ethan and Caleb's abandonment, the way they'd come back after the inheritance. "I want this to be clear," I said in one entry, my voice steady. "They left me when I needed them most. They only came back because of the money. This is my truth, and no one can take it from me." I saved the videos to a hard drive and uploaded them to a secure cloud, a safeguard against any future lies they might try to spin. A week later, I noticed something unsettling. I was outside checking the mail when I saw a black car parked down the street, its engine running, windows tinted. Sat there for a few minutes, then drove off slowly. My stomach twisted. It wasn't a coincidence. I went back inside, locked the door, and called a security company. Within 2 days, my house was equipped with cameras, motion detectors, and new locks. I wasn't taking any chances. That night, I sat with Margaret, telling her everything. She listened quietly, then reached for my hand, her grip firm. "They'll come back," she said softly. "But you're ready for them." I nodded, a fire burning in my chest. "I want them to see what they walked away from," I said. "I want them to understand what I've become." I spent the next few days finishing the transition of the house to the nonprofit. I packed up the last of my belongings, ready to move to my cottage in the mountains, a place where I could finally find peace. But I knew Ethan wouldn't let go that easily. I'd seen the greed in his eyes, the way he'd looked at the house like it was already his. I was prepared for a fight, but this time it would be on my terms. I thought about the woman I'd been 4 years ago, scared, broken, alone, and compared her to the woman I was now. I'd survived cancer, rebuilt my life, and turned my pain into power. Ethan and Caleb had no idea what they were up against, and I was ready to show them. 2 weeks after their first visit, the knock came again. It was softer this time, almost hesitant, but I knew who it was before I even looked. I was on the porch with Nora, sipping tea and watching the sunset, when I saw Ethan and Caleb walking up the driveway. Ethan's posture was stiff, his face set in a forced smile, while Caleb trailed behind, his hands in his pockets, his eyes downcast. I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Nora squeezed my hand, her presence a quiet reminder of the support I'd found in the aftermath of their betrayal. "You've got this," she whispered. I nodded, stepping forward to meet them. I opened the door halfway, stepping outside and closing it behind me. "What do you want now?" I asked, my voice steady. Then spoke first, his tone careful. "You've been ignoring us, Libby. We just want talk." Crossed my arms, my gaze hard. "I've had nothing to say." Ethan sighed, glancing at Caleb. This is ridiculous. We were married for 22 years. Don't we deserve a conversation? I raised an eyebrow. Now you want to talk about what we deserve? Caleb stepped forward, his voice soft. Mom, can I say something? I turned to him, my heart softening slightly at the word Mom, the first time he'd said it since he left. I know you're angry, he said, his voice trembling. You have every right to be. I was selfish, scared. I followed Dad because it was easier. I thought I'd come back, but the longer I stayed away, the harder it got to face you. His words hit me hard, stirring a mix of emotions I wasn't ready to feel. I wanted to believe him, to let him back in, but I couldn't, not yet. Ethan, though, looked annoyed. We didn't come here to grovel, he said, his voice sharp. You're healthy now, Libby. You've moved on. Why are you still holding on to this bitterness? I stared at him, my anger flaring. Bitterness, I said, my voice rising. I fought cancer alone, Ethan. I drove myself to radiation, changed my own bandages, cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd survive. And you were off finding comfort with someone else, while our son didn't even send a card. Don't you dare talk to me about bitterness. Caleb's eyes filled with tears. You were alone the whole time? He asked, his voice breaking. I thought you had help. I nodded, my throat tight. I wanted my family, I said. But you left. Ethan broke the silence, his voice cold. Let's talk about what matters now. I heard about the trust, the house, the money. Caleb could use some help with college. I could use some help too. You're sitting on millions, Libby. I let out a cold laugh. And you're sitting on the memory of abandoning your sick wife, I snapped. I pointed to the camera on the porch. You see that? You're being recorded. Everything we say, everything we do is saved. If you show up again uninvited, I'll file for a restraining order. Finn's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. So you're just going to let your own son struggle while you sit here in luxury? Caleb shook his head, stepping back. Dad, stop, he said, his voice firm. He turned to me, his eyes shimmering. I don't want your money, Mom. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, not because of the inheritance, but because I hurt you. I'll be here if you ever want to talk. He walked away, leaving Ethan stunned, and I watched him go, a crack forming in the wall I'd built around my heart. Ethan stood there, his face red with anger, but I didn't give him the chance to speak. This house isn't mine anymore, I said, my voice calm. I donated it to a nonprofit for cancer survivors. I'm moving to my cottage in the mountains. You'll get nothing from me, Ethan. You walked away once, do it again. I turned and went inside, closing the door on him, on the past, on the pain. I'd faced them and I'd won, not with anger but with the strength I'd built over 4 years. I was free and they couldn't take that from me. 2 months later, I stood in my new cottage in the mountains, the air crisp and clean, the view of the peaks stretching out before me like a promise. The space was small but perfect, with a cozy fireplace, a soft rug underfoot, and walls painted a warm cream. My bookkeeping business was thriving. I'd taken on new clients, mostly women-owned businesses, and found joy in helping them grow. I'd also started volunteering at a local cancer support center, sharing my story to inspire others, showing them they could survive even the darkest times. I'd even begun writing a blog, Surviving and Thriving, where I shared tips for emotional and financial resilience, hoping to help others avoid the pain I'd endured. The response was overwhelming. Women from all over reached out, thanking me for giving them hope. Ethan faded into the background, his attempts to contact me growing weaker until they stopped altogether. I heard through a mutual friend that he'd moved to California, chasing some new business venture that inevitably failed. Caleb, though, was different. He sent me a letter a few weeks after our last meeting, not asking for anything, just apologizing again, saying he was working on himself, hoping one day I might be ready to talk. I didn't respond, not yet, but I kept the letter in a drawer, a small sign that maybe in time there could be healing. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was open to the possibility, and that felt like a victory in itself. One evening, I hosted a small gathering at my cottage. Nora, Margaret, Mrs. Brooks, and a few women from the support group. We sat around the fireplace, sharing stories and laughter, the warmth of their friendship wrapping around me like a blanket. I looked at them, these women who'd become my family, and felt a deep sense of peace. I wasn't the Libby who'd been abandoned, who'd fought cancer alone. I was stronger now, more sure of myself, more alive than I'd ever been. As the night wound down, I stepped outside, the stars glittering above, the mountain air cool against my skin. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. This wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was better. I was free, not because Ethan and Caleb had let me go, but because I'd taken myself back. So I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to rebuild your life? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear your story. Maybe tell me your city too, so we can connect over the battles we've won. I'm Libby, and this has been my story. Betrayal can break us, but it can also show us who we really are. I didn't just survive Ethan and Caleb's abandonment, I turned it into my strength and I came out stronger. Life tests us in the darkest moments, but those are the moments we find our power. If I can do it, so can you. I stood there a little longer, the night wrapping around me, and thought about the journey I'd been on. I remembered the first night in the hospital, the way I'd felt so alone, so broken. I thought about the women at the support center, the way their eyes lit up when I told them they could make it through. I'd found a purpose, a community, a new version of myself, and I knew I'd never let anyone take that from me again. The future was mine to shape, and I was ready for whatever came next.